Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 286, we talk about the French-based Hexatrek. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. In 2022, a new long-distance hiking trail opened, and for once this wasn't in the USA. This new track, called the Hexatrek, solely based in France, joins up a series of pre-existing tracks and takes in 14 national parks to create a 3,034-kilometre journey through some of the most amazing scenery that France has to offer. In this podcast episode, we catch up with New Zealand hiker Claire McCall, who undertook a few sections of this walk with her husband James in the year that it opened. Claire, it's our pleasure to talk with you about your journey on the Hexatrek.
Nice to be here, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Now, before we talk about the Hexatrek, tell us a bit about yourself, your general background and your hiking experience.
So I basically started hiking in my 40s when a friend of mine said, would you like to come and do a day hike up the Pinnacles? I should have actually known that the clue was in the name, the Pinnacles. So off I went. And by the time I got to the top, there were a few ladders to scale, and I actually didn't make it. I piped out, and when I came back down, the next day, I was so stiff from walking up and down in the day that I had to walk downstairs sideways. But that didn't put me off. We formed a little friends group, and we started to walk all the great walks in New Zealand. So I've done all but one of the great walks. I haven't done the one in Stewart Island. And then when I got together with James, he's from the UK and he used to walk through the fells in the Lake District quite a lot. Started putting some international walks on the list. And we, when my son was 14, we took him and we climbed Kilimanjaro. So that was quite an adventure, quite a challenge. And then we also have been in Patagonia where we did the W Trek, which was just an incredible trek. And we've done, a fair few walks, I would say. Yeah, that's me.
So you're a bit fitter now than the first walk up the Pinnacles?
I think so. I can remember doing my first great walk here and thinking, gosh, people actually walk for 4 hours in a row and thinking, oh my goodness. But now, I mean, to me, 4 hours is, after doing the Hexatrek in particular, is nothing.
Okay, now let's talk about the Hexatrek. Until a few months ago, I hadn't heard about this track, but now I'm seeing it everywhere. How did you come across it?
So James and I had been thinking a lot about doing a long-distance trail. I had thought about it first. I don't know why. Just the idea of the freedom of it, I think, really grabbed me. And we were, of course, looking at the Pacific Crest Trail. That was around about the time of the pandemic. And we started reading a bit more about it, and there were loads of wildfires going on. There were bears to think about, and it just put me off. So when I must have been, because I was reading about a long-distance trail, the algorithms in social media kept popping up this advert for this thing called the Hexatrek. at the same time, I'd been studying French, so I thought, wow, a long-distance trail in France, this is made for me, definitely. So switched my allegiance over to the Hexatrek.
Okay, so we know that the Hexatrek's a long-distance trail in France, but give us a bit more of an idea about logistics.
So there's an incredible website that you can go on to. It's not a brand new trail. It is in terms of the fact that the organisers of it, the developers of the trek, have put together linked together 47 GR routes, the Grand Randonnée routes, which go through France. They call it the Hexatrek because France is shaped like a hexagon, but even though the trail doesn't actually go all the way around every single side of the hexagon, there are 6 stages to it. They've divided it into 6 stages, and it's a very high-level route. It goes through the mountains. It's 3,034 kilometres long. It passes through 14 national parks, but it also has an incredible elevation gain of 138,000 metres.
That's a fair amount.
It's a challenging one. Yes. But I think when I was looking at it, I kind of glossed over the fact that there were mountains. I kind of imagined we might be walking through mountains in the valleys, which proved not to be the point.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think it's, if you're doing a trail of that length, wherever you are, whichever country you are in the world, it's not likely to be dead flat unless you've managed to luck out somewhere. So, but yeah, 138,000 metres of elevation is a lot of elevation.
It certainly is, but I'm not a numbers person. James is, and he tried to warn me, but I'm a words person, and all these numbers just going through the air. I think if I'd had any idea of what the numbers meant on the ground, with boots on the ground, I might have changed my mind about doing that walk.
Okay, now, is there a right or a wrong way? And, so I believe you can start from either end, and there are advantages from starting from either end. Which way did you pick and why?
Well, when we first did a little bit of research, we thought we would start in May. We had to start in May because we had work commitments to get back to in September. So although the Hexatrek people advised to start in June, we thought, well, we'll start in May. And being incredibly naive, we thought the way to do it would be to go northward bound and start down in the south, merely because of the fact that it would be warmer in the south in May. But it didn't take as long to discover that actually the Pyrenees are very high, and they start to be very high very quickly. So in order to avoid being snowbound, we should start in the north and walk southward bound through the Vosges first. So that's what we ended up doing.
Okay.
But there's definitely, advantages to doing either way. We followed the year after some other Kiwis who did it the same way we did it, starting in the north, going south. And they said that by the time they got to the Pyrenees, they were so exhausted. They were also our age, in our mid-50s, that it was really tough. And they kept more to the GR10 rather than going on the actual Hexatrek route because of that reason. So there's pros and cons to either direction, is what I'd say. It's unique to you and what your priorities are.
Now, I suppose as part of that, now you chose to do, was it the whole track or just part of the track before you went over?
We always knew that we would run out of time to do the whole trek. So our aim was to do 4 stages of the trek. We weren't going to do the Pyrenees. So we had to, as Kiwis, we had to get a long stay visa. We had to go to the French embassy and get a long stay visa for that, which I believe is absolutely the same in Australia. And yeah, that's it. We only had about a 4.5 month time period.
Okay. Now, the trail, as you said, is 3,034 kilometres long. And again, according to the website, they're saying it takes somewhere between 3 to 5 months to complete. What made you to decide to do this particular trail and the sections that you did? Was it just the trying to avoid the Pyrenees and avoid the snow, or was there some other reason?
Well, that was a very good reason, because I didn't want to do any crampon walking. I've never walked in crampons, so I'm an absolute novice in that regard. So that was one of the main reasons. But I just wanted to go to France, and the Vosges turned out to be, a real highlight. I think it's an underrated destination. And it was a really nice, gentle introduction to a long-distance walk. It was not, the Alps. Suddenly you're into it. And it actually gave us a time to hone our fitness, our hiking legs. We'd done, we kept pretty fit. We do a few multi-day hikes, but this is a totally different kettle of fish. So it really did give us the chance to do that in a gentle introduction.
Apart from the logistics and the easing yourself into the track itself, did you have any preconceived expectations as far as the scenery or the culture that made you choose the direction and the sections you did, or was it just purely the logistical side of things?
There was the logistical side of things, but as I say, I really wanted to immerse myself in the French culture. The French part of it was really important to me, because I had been studying the language for a couple of years, and I thought this would be a really good way to, dive on in and meet some French people as well. So that was great. And I think we liked the idea that with these established trails that the Hexatrek goes on, there are so many little villages that you come to. You're not walking days and days and days without being able to veer off the path and, go to another village or maybe find a restaurant or something along those lines. It just seemed a lot more doable to me, and in a culture that I really wanted to get to know a bit better. And who can resist a walk with good cheese?
You can't argue with that.
So yeah, there was all of that. It just seemed like the best option for us.
Apart from the long distance, this track is unique, being designed mainly as a camping trail. So a lot of the routes in Europe and the UK tend to be staying in bodies, staying in huts or hostels, but this one through here is very much based around tenting it, although you do have the option of certainly staying in a more upmarket accommodation. What was your plan as far as accommodation went? Was it to sort of have a mix, or was it mainly to camp, or what was your plan there?
Yeah, well, when we first started out, we said we're not going to be purists. It's definitely marketed as a bivouac trail. So bivouacking is different to camping in that you're only in one place for one night, and you have to basically be out of there by 9 o'clock in the morning and only set up your tent at 6 o'clock at night, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So we definitely bought a tent, and this is something we'd never done before, but we did our research and bought a Nemo dagger.
Yep.
And James carried it, which was very kind of him. And we knew that we would use it a lot, but we also knew that there were refuges along the way. And they proved to be one of the absolute highlights of the trail, especially in the Vosges. In the Vosges, the refuges tend to be non-serviced, which means they aren't manned by any staff. They can range from something that looks like a garden shed to an amazing building with a, stone roof and, huge outlook over and a veranda. And we tended, because we were so early on we started May 7th, so we're very early on in the hiking season, we tended to have all these places to ourselves, which was incredible. And they're absolutely free. They're maintained by Club Vosgien, People go there, stock them with firewood. The vast majority of them, in fact, all of them I can remember, had wood-burning stoves in them, which was just an incredible system. And, yeah, we loved them. So we did have a tent, but we hardly bivouacked. I think we bivouacked in the wild maybe twice. We stayed in refuges, non-service refuges, quite a lot through the Vosges. When we got into the Alps, it tended to be more the serviced refuges where they were staffed and you paid for demi-board, where you got a meal, etc., which was great, a fantastic experience too. But there were also things called gîtes d'étape, which were these little places in villages that are reserved for people like hikers and cyclists. That's who is allowed to stay in them. They tend to have dormitory-style accommodation, but they are brilliant and really cheap. So, we mixed it up, and we did stay in campsites too, which gave us a bit of a luxury in our tent.
Now, I know looking at the app, which is available from the Hexatrek website, they do have some sections marked where non-tenting or tenting is not an option. So, but it is good. I mean, as I said, a lot of the tracks in Europe or in UK are very much you go from bothy to bothy or from hut to hut. So it's good to see a track like this, which provides plenty of options to really choose your own adventure in that sort of situation.
Yeah, I mean, when we ended up getting COVID at one stage, and so we ended up staying in a village. It's just, there's so many options. It's fantastic. And, after a few days out camping, you wanted to wash your clothes, we would just stay in a village, book into some accommodation. We stayed in some incredible Airbnbs. We really, really mixed it up, and I think that was one of the highlights of the trail.
Okay. Now, you said you planned on doing 4 sections of the trail. Is that what you ended up doing once you'd finished? No,
we did the first stage, which is actually the longest stage. It's through the Vosges. It's around 650 kilometres. And then we did 670 kilometres it is. Then we did the Northern Alps, which are 382 kilometres. And then we realised that we were starting to run out of time. And also the constant up and down really did get to me. It was, as James explained it to me, the Alps are like a series of waves. And we were walking up the gentle sloping upside, but coming down was so much harder, the direction we were going. And so there was no respite. Each day seemed to be a 1,200, metre climb, 800-metre descent. So I was starting to really struggle with it, and I knew we weren't going to make the whole 4 stages. We were running out of time. So we swapped. Once we met a really lovely, fun couple in the Vanoise, and we slowed down our pace to keep up with them. And things just got a lot nicer when we slowed down our pace. And then we decided to just carry on with the GR5, which goes down to Nice. So we basically walked the length of the Alps, and then at a place called Mont Tabor, we turned right where we should have turned left, and we carried on walking down to the Mediterranean. In my mind, I thought, that's a good end. I feel like I've walked from Germany to the Mediterranean, and, that's a good place to stop it.
Okay, no, that's
so
good.
That's what we did.
But so you did, by the sound of it, over 1,000 kilometres anyway, which is not a bad run for a long distance hike.
Yes, we did 1,320 kilometres, something along that line. I mean, if we'd carried on, we would have finished the 3rd stage of the Hexatrek, but we would have been in the middle of the country, and to me, that just wasn't a natural end point. So we changed our mind, but I didn't realise how, when we first set off, we thought, if there's a bit we don't like or a bit we think's a bit silly, we'll cut out a loop or we'll catch a bus and we'll go to the next stage. But as soon as I got on the trail, that just felt almost like too much like cheating. I really had to walk, even if I was changing the route, every step of the way.
Yeah.
So it became I never thought I'd be like that, but it became like an obsession to walk every step of the way somewhere.
Okay. Now, we've talked about accommodation, but what did you do food-wise? Did you carry your own, or did you rely on cafes and restaurants, or was it a bit of a mixture of both?
Again, it's a mixture of both. I mean, what the beauty of the route is that it's Europe, and there are always little villages, within, a day's walk of you, mostly. I think there was one section where there was about a 3-day gap. But unlike the PCT where you can go, days and days and you have to carry loads of water, this was far more well catered to, lots more amenity. So we did carry our own food every day. We'd have invariably a baguette for lunch.
Yep.
We felt really French with our baguette sticking out our backpacks and a baguette, cheese and tomato baguette for lunch. The French laugh at dehydrated meals. We had some, and when we met French people, they looked at us like we were crazy. And we ended up going to supermarkets and getting, couscous and things like that for dinner. But often we found that we were either in a campsite that had a restaurant, which is, so amazing, unheard of really, for campsites to have restaurants in New Zealand or Australia, I imagine. So we'd eat at the campsite restaurant, or we'd be in a village and we'd eat there. But yeah, for food, it was incredible. One thing I would say is that the French really value their lunch time, and it goes from 12 to 2. And so if you're planning on arriving in a village, I mean, we'd invariably arrive in a village and want to go to the shop to get provisions. Well, the shop will be closed if you arrive between those hours, and the shop will be closed if you arrive on a Sunday. So there was a bit of logistical planning with that. And there was one stage where we seemed to be arriving in a village every day where they were closed on the Monday, and then the next village we arrived, they were closed on the Tuesday. So, but I can say that we never ever once felt, oh yes, there was once when we, right towards the end of the trip, where we had no food left just about. We thought it was a Friday, we were in a village, we thought there's bound to be a restaurant open, and both restaurants in this village were closed for some inexplicable reason. And luckily we were staying in one of those gîtes d'étape, and we had seen in the kitchen downstairs somebody had left a pack of pasta and a packet of soup. And so we had soup on our pasta, and we had it for breakfast too.
I must admit, we went to France not for a hiking holiday a number of years ago, and we'd usually drop it and fill up the car as we went, and we'd buy a baguette and cheese for breakfast. And I'm sure the French probably think, oh, this is just rubbish, but for us it was pretty amazing.
Oh, the baguette and cheeses, and so cheap. I mean, €2 for a cheese, a whole wheel of cheese that's absolutely, French brie or something. It's just amazingly cheap, and €1 for a baguette, apart from when we went into Switzerland and suddenly the baguettes became €4 each.
Before you went, I mean, so you obviously sounded like you're doing a mix of supermarket and restaurant and cafes. Had you planned on a food resupply option before you went? I mean, did you bring a whole batch of dehydrated meals with you just in case, or?
We always had one bag of couscous or an actual dehydrated meal on us for just in case. But really, as it turns out, there was no worries on that score. I can't say what it was like through the Pyrenees because we didn't do that section, but certainly in the Vosges and in the Jura and in the Alps, there was just so many options that, I don't think you need to, unlike the PCT, you don't need to sort of think. We only looked 1 or 2 days ahead in the whole trail. So, having a resupply, sent a box or something sent somewhere would have been impossible for us, but it wasn't necessary at all. The water, sometimes on the Hexatrek app, the water, it indicated some water points, which turned out to be dry. It was a heat wave, canicule, when the year we walked, 2022, and that was something really to be aware of, is that the refuges, some of them were closed because they had no water. So it's definitely worth, checking ahead with the refuges that are serviced. You have to actually book. So you ring the day before or 2 days before and you tell them that you're coming. But some of them were closed because there had been no snow. And so therefore in the winter and so therefore in the summer, no water. It was incredibly sad, actually, that whole situation. But we bumped into a lovely young couple who were travelling with their toddler. They were cycling from Montpellier to the Arctic Circle with a toddler and a practical newborn, and they gave us one of the best tips ever. They said, if you come to a village and you need water and the water fountain isn't working, go to the churchyard and go to the cemetery and get the water there, because they have taps that are plumbed into the mains, because people need water for watering the flowers on the graves. And that was one of the most invaluable tips we received.
Okay. What was the trail tread like, at least on the sections that you did? Was it formed trail or concrete and bitumen, or was it a bit of a mixture of everything?
Mainly it was formed trail. I mean, the network of routes in France is just incredible. So definitely it was formed trail, really good tracks. We didn't do any of the detour routes that are now suggested on the Hexatrek app. And the only road walking we did was when we left the GR5 and we're making our way across to the Jura. There is no link between the GR5 in France and the Jura. We had to go through Switzerland, and they don't link. And that was a day of road walking. But all in all, I know the Tierra Trail here has a lot more road walking, but we had a day. Yeah,
that's pretty good. I was going to say, particularly when you are linking pre-existing trails, you expect there to be gaps somewhere, but it sounds like you did pretty well in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, the road walking other than that we did was our own choice. There was a part of the Alps where we heard that the snow was still really, really thick on the ground, and so I called it. I said, no, I'm not going. So we had to find a route down through the valleys and walk that way. But that was about a couple of days. But if we'd stuck on the trail, it would have been definitely formed trail.
Okay, now I'll go off a bit off track what we've talked about previously. What was the weather like? I mean, what is France in what I'm guessing is the summertime or the start of the summertime, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, so we went in May, which was very early. Most people leave towards the end of May or June, but early May was absolutely the most stunning weather. We were so lucky that year. We only had 2 times when we had rain and 1 hailstorm. And the heat was more than bearable up in the Alps. I hear that it was quite unbearable in stage 3, which is, or stage 4 really, the gorges and the Caucasus. we met a person who said that it had been absolutely, they couldn't walk during the middle of the day, that type of thing. So it pays to bear in mind that it gets incredibly hot in June and July, but when you're at the height we were at, most of the route, that's perfectly fine.
What about the nighttime temperatures? What were they like?
They were fine. I'm absolutely petrified of the cold. I was born in South Africa, and I just have not experienced no ice, that type of thing. I'm not a mountain woman. I have been known to pull out an emergency blanket when I was in a hut in New Zealand, which my friends will never let me live down. But that's because I had a terrible sleeping bag. So I had since invested in an incredible sleeping bag. But it's not a huge winter weight one. It would have been sort of a really compact autumn one. And I had a little tiny puffer jacket, couple of layers, and the nighttime temperatures were fine. Not once was I cold to the point of, well, unlike I've climbed Kilimanjaro when I had icicles on my hair, nothing as severe as that. I mean, it was absolutely fine.
What about the signage? Were there? I mean, certainly as an Australian, on particularly our longer trails, I'm used to having regular signs, even just arrows that point in the right direction. Is there a Hexatrek trail marker, or you're swapping from great route to great route as you go?
Yes, that's exactly what you're doing. You're following the GR routes little signs, which are, as you can imagine, incredibly well signposted. So you're following the app, of course, which is, for me, it was perfect. The app was such a great tool. But yeah, you're following on the actual boots on the ground. You're following the GR signage, which is very, very good. I think there was only one stage through the Alps where we had to follow a few cairns, but for the main part, definitely you're just looking for the little signs on rocks and trees and, actual made signs which tell you which altitude you're at. It's very, very well marked.
Okay. Now, you did mention altitude there. What sort of altitude were you at? I mean, I think if you're down on the coastline, you expect to be fairly low. But what were you very high where you were as an average thing?
Those aren't very high, but of course the Alps are. So there's definitely a few close to 3,000 metre cols that you have to go over. I think the highest one we came across was in the Vanoise. It was the Col de Chevier. It was probably about 2,800 metres. So yeah, there are some high peaks out there for sure. But by the time we got to them, happily, we were much more fit. And, sometimes I didn't even know I was that close to being at 3,000 metres.
I was going to say, given the altitude, was at any stage altitude sickness an issue? No,
definitely not.
Okay.
No, I mean, I've been up Kilimanjaro, and that certainly was an issue then. But no, the issue for me was certainly not the height; it was the length.
Yeah.
I kind of imagined it would be like putting a few. In my mind, it was like putting a few multi-day walks together, and I know how much I love multi-day walks. But actually, the mental toughness it takes this was my very first long-distance hike. It's quite different.
All right. Now, how busy was the trail? Were there a lot of people out where you were, or you had some busy sections and some quiet sections?
It's busier than a non-great walk in New Zealand, say. In the Vosges, it was quite quiet because we were walking so early in the season, and there would be like a day when we wouldn't come across anybody on the trail. But because it in the Vosges, it's a land of castles, and we would be walking, and then we'd come to this point of interest, and you definitely find people there, obviously. In the Alps, there were a few more people around, I would say. You're never on your own completely. You never feel like you're completely on your own for days and days on end. but you're crossing things like the Tour de Mont Blanc. So as soon as you get onto that trail, suddenly there are a whole load of people around you. But yeah, it's not overwhelmingly busy, but it's not remote.
Now, describe a typical day on trail for us, from waking up to going to sleep.
So mainly we were, I would say, in tents. So it would be waking up. We didn't put an alarm on to walk, from 7 in the morning or anything like that. We probably started around 8 or 9, which was quite a leisurely pace. Wake up, put the coffee on. Definitely got to have coffee. Get the gas cylinder out. I would say one thing about the gas in France, or click-in ones. We have screw-in ones. So they had more click-in ones. So we took our screw-in one, and it was very difficult to find gas canisters for that. You could only get those in the bigger, like the decathlons, in the bigger places, bigger cities. So we ended up having to buy sort of like 10 kilos of gas, which was a bit silly because we didn't know when we were going to come across the next supply store. So yeah, definitely do your investigation into that. So up, make the coffee, make the breakfast, start walking, walk for about 3-4 hours, depends. Get to a lovely refuge. We always like to stop mainly at refuges for our lunch, grab the baguette and the cheese and the tomato, have a rest and head off. More walking, usually we did a 20 to 25 kilometre day, and then, start thinking, well, we had a plan of where we were going to end the day and make it to that, and it all starts again, make the couscous. And I'd actually was doing a blog, so I'd occasionally spend the evening writing up on a Wi-Fi keyboard, which was attached to my phone, my portable phone, a bit of blogging. James is an artist, so he might do some sketching, and then, into the tent, and it starts all over again.
So what time would you normally go to bed at night?
Oh, we'd probably be in bed by about 9, but I had downloaded onto my phone the whole series of Peaky Blinders. So I watched that. I watched, every episode from every series of Peaky Blinders at night in the tent, which was funny.
Okay. So you're saying you're averaging around about 20 to 25 kilometres per day?
Yes, we were.
Okay. And how did you find the terrain? I mean, again, I suppose it depends on where you are, but how did you find doing that? Was it quite manageable sort of distance?
I think we started off with about 20, and as we got fitter, we managed to do bigger distances, even though it sounds not that much bigger, 23 to, just an extra 3 to 5 kilometres. Because of the terrain, it actually was quite a lot more. And then when we swapped to it was tough. I found the long distance walk really tough, more mentally than physically. But when we got towards the end, when we were getting down to Nice, we were doing much, and we'd finished the high part of the Alps. We were doing much longer distances. I think the last day we walked 39 kilometres. Yeah. Which we weren't planning to do, but we couldn't find any accommodation where we thought we were going to find it, and it was starting to get quite built up, and there was no place to put up the tent, and so we decided that we'd just walk the rest of it the same day. So when when needs must, we walked quite a fair distance. So yeah.
Okay, so what were the highlights of the trail for you?
I've not done any particular walking in Europe. I've walked the Rota Vicentina in Portugal, but that was a coastal route. So being able to walk through the mountains of the Vosges and the Alps was just incredible. I couldn't believe the scenery. It was immense. I remember standing on the top of yet another Alp and looking around and just seeing them going on and on and on and thinking, gosh, this is huge. And also I was in the valleys, especially in the Vanoise, I was so thrilled that there were so many wildflowers. I feel like far more than in the New Zealand landscape, just lots and lots and lots of wildflowers. It was so pretty, and the little marmots, running around. They're really quite comical little creatures. The refuge system is a huge highlight. I can't believe that, there are these free huts that you can just stay at, and that are always well stocked with firewood by volunteers. So that's a massive highlight. But for me personally, we met the two Swiss women in the Vanoise, and they just made the walk so much more fun, and they were the same age as us, and I ended up playing Scrabble in French with them and one of the refuges. And for me, just the conversations in French and getting, in this incredible environment was a real highlight, yeah.
Okay, now you're talking about having conversations in French. Do you need to be able to speak French to do this walk, or obviously it would help, but can get away with just being an English speaker?
Absolutely. I think, really what you need is the ability to read the app. But when you come into the villages, a little bit of French always helps. Of course it does. But you can just point at things you want to buy. It's really not, an essential. And although the people don't always speak English, some of them do, but I would say you'll get by just fine with the basic, bonjour.
Yeah. Okay, now you mentioned that the altitude wasn't one of your favourite things, climbing up and down all day. On the website, they now talk a bit about some high route options if you feel like gaining a bit more altitude. Was this a thing that was available when you went through, or it wasn't really something that was highlighted at that stage?
No, we did it on the very first year that the app was developed. In fact, we signed up to sponsor the app when it was in development, which was I just thought, what an incredible idea, what a great idea. And so they've spent the last 2 years ironing out a few glitches, and also, giving people these alternatives. I think for me, the basic route was challenge enough. And it certainly wouldn't be, I would be cutting out parts. There were definitely parts that for one part where we saw it went up over another hill, and actually I found a Roman road going down to La Clémène, and we followed that, and it was the best thing we'd ever done. It was just such a breeze. It was still a road that was just, it was a little bit overgrown, but it was incredibly good nick. So yes, I know that they have added these alternatives for people who want to challenge themselves a bit more, but I certainly couldn't talk from personal experience about that.
You said you were 55 when you hiked this trail. How did you find it in terms of fitness and the hiker culture on trail?
I was fit when I started, I thought, but I got a lot fitter. I can remember that when I first started, I would need to get James to help me to put my backpack on. And if I dropped my hiking poles, there would be a lot of grumbling and grunting to lean over and pick them up with my backpack on. But, about 2 or 3 weeks into the hike, I suddenly realized that I was just slinging on my backpack like it was nothing and scooping up my poles, and off I'd go. So certainly, improved in my fitness, although I never felt fit enough. I just don't think I could ever have felt fit enough for those days. And yeah, the hiker culture, I feel like we were one of the older couples on the route. There were quite a few younger people. When we dropped down and intersected with the Camino, then we got a lot more people our age, around us. And so the hiker culture is fantastic. I love that so many more people seem to be taking up hiking as an activity. I find that sometimes the hiker culture on social media is so not realistic. I mean, lots of pictures of glamorous, people looking incredibly well groomed when they've just climbed up a massive mountain. It's certainly not what I was looking like.
No. Okay. You might start out looking at that, and then as soon as you get out of bed and at the start of the day, but it doesn't take long to become a bit dishevelled by the end of the day. So,
right, all ruddy in the face, and yeah.
Okay, so as your first long distance hike, from your perspective, was it life changing, and what impact did it have on you post hike?
I think it was definitely a once in a lifetime experience, and I think it wasn't life changing in the way I kind of thought it might be life changing. I thought what would happen would be that I would, discover the meaning of life, or maybe get so hooked that I would just become this woman who went around the world doing one long distance hike after the other. But it didn't change me like that. But it did reinforce my love of the French culture. We had so many people who were so kind to us and who helped us, when shops were closed, when maybe, with food, with directions, with all sorts of things, and just lovely, lovely people. That the year after we did it in 2023, we ended up doing a home exchange to France for 6 months and meeting a whole new group of people who we really got on with. And so I feel the way it has changed my life is that I now have sort of a group of friends in the Northern Hemisphere, which, for all my life I've never managed to make, and suddenly now I have. So you just don't know how one of these experiences is going to pan out, and you don't know what it's going to do to your life, is what I would say, but it's exciting to find out.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things you don't realise the impact doing a long distance hike will have on you. And there's a book I can remember reading many ways that, it was the title, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was "Through Hiking Will Break Your Heart," in a good way. But I think it certainly does change your whole perspective on life. When you're immersed in nature for so long and so often. Yes,
and also you don't know what you can do until you go and do it. The whole hike, but a 1,300 kilometre hike. I mean, if I tell my friends I did that, they think that's quite impressive.
It certainly is. Now, as part of this trip, you ended up releasing a book from your adventure. Was that the original plan, or was this just something that came about on the trip itself?
It definitely wasn't the original plan. I did do a blog because I'm a professional writer. I'm a journalist. So I thought, well, I'm going to want to remember this. And so I blogged en route. And then when I got back, I had so much to talk about and share with people. And because I had the blog, I thought, this makes the framework of a book. And it's a new hike, and I'd like people to know about it. I think it's an incredible option for people. There's the Tiara Trail, of course, and one day I'd definitely like to do that. But other than that, all I know of is, the hikes in America, the long-distance hikes in America. So I thought people should know about this one. And that's how the book came about, really. I wanted to encourage people of all ages, but mainly of my age, middle age, to go and do something. And, this to me is a gentler long-distance hike than the PCT. So very doable.
Okay, and we'll talk a bit more about the book as part of the book review and as part of our discussion after we do your interview. Now, I think a couple of questions or a couple of things that you talked about there raised a couple of other questions. So what was your pack weight for, and again, I know this is going to vary, but what was your typical pack weight for the trip?
So my pack weight was fairly light. I was very lucky because James was carrying the tent and a fair few other things. So I had a 13 kilo pack and James was carrying 17 kilos. And it's quite telling, I think. We walked 64 days and James lost 17 kilos in weight. He lost the whole weight of his pack. That's how strenuous it was. We didn't pack super light. We're not ultralight hikers, but I feel like we didn't carry more than we needed, really.
Okay, and was there any special piece of gear you wish you had, or that you were thankful you did have?
Coffee making facility.
Yep.
With a coffee filter, basically, was very important. My power pack was really, really light. I loved it, and I wouldn't do without it. So you need a lightweight power pack. But no, we just had the basics. I did pack a dress for the towns, which I will confess to, but it was incredibly lightweight, made of some sort of polyester fabric that could scrunch up to nothing and didn't need an iron. And when we came into some of the towns where we'd take a 0 day, as they call it, I'd just pull it out and it was fantastic. So yeah. I think you can have a few little, home comforts.
Okay. Well, now I'll ask you two final questions. Would you recommend this trail to hikers? And if so, who?
Well, I definitely recommend it. I mean, it's actually a series of trails, isn't it? So they're long-established trails. They go through, they're mainly GR routes. So they go through the most incredible scenery. They wouldn't be GR routes otherwise. And you can section hike. You can go on and off. You could do the whole thing if you want to. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who can spare the time, a 6-month block from their life. It will be something you could never possibly regret. And the more midlife hikers we can get out there onto this trail, the better, is what I'd say.
And the final question is, are you glad you did this track rather than the PCT?
Absolutely. 100%. I don't know. I feel like the PCT may have had flatter sections, not all sections, of course, but I feel like the weather, the prospect of bears, the prospect of rattlesnakes, I'm really glad I did this one, not the PCT.
Okay, so we've been talking with Claire McCall about her journey on the Hexatrek trail in France. Claire, thank you for taking your time to chat with us about this amazing trail and your journey.
Great. I'd encourage anybody to look it up, to look up the website, to look up the Discord group. It's a group that's any question possible you can possibly think of. Join the Hexatrek Discord group and you discuss it on there. And if you're interested in a fun story about our actual experiences, which I hope will make you laugh, but also give you a lot of good information, look up the book, Hiking the Hexa. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. So that was our interview with Claire McCall on her journey on the French Hexatrek. And this has been an interesting one for me. Before the beginning of 2024, I hadn't heard anything on this trail, and my focus has always been on the US long-distance hiking trails. And it was only after listening to a podcast episode out of the States and then Claire contacting me almost a few days after that I started to see quite a lot of information on the internet around this trail, and it really did pique my interest.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? You hear something once and then you hear lots about it.
So the Hexatrek, weird sort of name, but again, it gets its name because France is essentially a hexagon. And the actual trail itself runs along the eastern border of France, down to almost the Mediterranean, and then along the bottom of France and meets into the ocean on the other side, just above Spain. So it's an interesting track. It's an interesting area to go through. And from our perspective, we've been to France twice over the last 10 years or so, and one of them was purely a tourist destination, and the other one we were doing some mountaineering. And in a lot of cases, we had avoided a lot of these areas. So when we were doing the tourist route, we pretty much went along the bottom and came up through the centre and the west coast of France. And even when we went through to Chamonix and did the mountaineering, we really didn't spend a lot of time in areas that this trail tends to cover. And for a lot of people, I think this is away from the main tourist areas. And as such, you're seeing parts of France that you're not likely to see in a normal trip there. Now, this track is 3,034 kilometres long, takes in 14 national parks and a large number of the GR Great Route in English, or I don't think that's quite the correct pronunciation of it, but it's essentially what they are. And it takes in 47 of those trails.
That's just enormous, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think it's rather than trying to create a brand new trail, what they've gone through and done is linked a series of really well-known and popular hiking trails in the country and joined them up into one big trail. So I think they've made good use of it. It's more a route, I suppose. They've taken they've taken all these excellent trails, joined them up, and provided a very unique experience, and one that's that I think, from my perspective, is probably unique worldwide. For those that have been listening to the Australian Hiker podcast for a number of years, you'll be aware that I really do want to go through and hike the Pacific Crest Trail. And if you've been looking at this trail over the last few years, there's been a major issue with fires, probably in the last 4 to 5 years. That's almost meant that unless you've started at exactly the right time and moved pretty quickly, it's almost been impossible to complete the trail in one calendar year. And Claire did make the comment that that's what she wanted to do, was hike the Pacific Crest Trail, but just found that the fires were creating such an issue, it's almost now become a trail that needs to be completed over 2 years. She also had some concerns about things like bears as well.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I mean, that's always potentially an issue. I mean, the Americans come over here and worry about our snakes. They don't seem to worry too much about their rattlesnakes over there, but
I think they worry about more than the snakes. There's a few things that we have that make life a little bit interesting.
So, yeah, she had the same view, that she was originally looking at doing the Pacific Crest Trail, discovered this trail and opted for it. And I think, from my perspective, listening to the interview, the things that I like about this is you can do it either going west to east or east to west. And I think in that respect, there is a recommendation that if you're trying to do this and avoid the snow in the mountains, the recommendation, I believe, is to start in the west and head over towards the east. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's the reasoning why. But that then means you're starting with the hardest and the highest elevation change at the start of the hike. So it depends on what you're planning on do. Claire and her partner James, they were never intending on doing the entire trip, but they certainly did over, I think it was roughly about 1,400 or 1,500 kilometres on this track, which is a pretty impressive sort of hike.
Big effort. Great job.
It is. And the recommendation to complete the entire track is 3 to 5 months. So it depends on how many kilometres you're planning on doing a day. But given the altitude change is 138,000 metres across the whole trail, you're going up and you're going down quite a lot. The things that I like about this, again, it is different from the Pacific Crest Trail. There's not as much wild beauty, I suppose, but there's certainly a lot of natural beauty. Looking at some of the images that Claire provided, and if you go to the show notes on the Australian Hiker podcast, you'll see some of the key images from her hike. There's some pretty amazing looking scenery. You get to go through a lot of French towns and villages. I think from a cultural perspective, it's got more of a pull to it than a lot of other long-distance trails.
Yeah, and Claire was saying that, she was wanting to really immerse into the French culture, and I think this was a great opportunity to do that.
One of the things we discovered when we did go to France, I think the last time we were there was
pre-COVID. I don't know.
2015, I think it was.
Oh no, I think it was a bit later than that.
And we were in a car and we were driving, and we'd drop into a petrol station to fuel the car up, but we'd then go and buy a baguette and some ham and some camembert cheese, which cost almost nothing. That was
really, really good produce. Probably not the kind of stuff that you'd buy at a servo in Australia, but heaps good. And yeah, that we do that every day. So, and Claire was saying that they'd put a baguette it'll probably look like a tourist baguette in the back of your backpack. But anyway, there you go.
And a tip for new players here, baguettes have got a life expectancy of probably half a day, and then they go rock hard.
They are fresh, so you have to eat them. There is nothing preserving them in whatsoever. So, yep, you just have to eat it.
Now, again, this trail is designed for camping, and this is a bit different with a lot of European, or even for that matter, a lot of New Zealand trails, which is where Claire's from. That you can certainly stay in hostels or the refuges as they call them. You can certainly stay in hotels. And for Claire's trip, she said she only camped for on about 2 of the nights. But there are large sections of this track where camping is perfectly doable. Sometimes you may have to pay for the camping, but there's a lot of wild camping available as well, which means you're camping in forests and remote areas. But apparently from what she was saying, that you're not allowed to camp before a certain time, and you have to be gone out of your camp at a certain time. So it doesn't sound like you can stay in one spot in your tent for 2 or 3 days.
No.
But I think that's an interesting thing. It gives you that access to culture and scenery, but it also gives you the opportunity to camp. And she was saying that when they did stay in the refuges, they can be a bit expensive sometimes because you're paying for 2 individuals rather than a room which you put 2 individuals in. So I think if you're travelling solo, the refuges is probably a good way to go. If you're travelling as a couple, it seems the hotels seems to be a good option. We've stayed in the French refuges before, and they really do tend to be share accommodation. Sometimes you might be lucky and get a private room, but they're limited, those ones, and they're the ones that often book out early.
They're pretty rare, that's for sure.
So we the ones we stayed in. We were in a room with probably I think 10 or 15 or 20 other people. And if people are snoring, you're stuck with it. So definitely take earbuds with you on that one. Yeah,
well, you were the one that was snoring. But it was a room that took many more people than that. So that's the other thing. It wasn't completely full.
But the rooms were warm, the facilities were good. You could buy a hot meal, you could buy wine if you needed to. And although Claire did say some of them were closed because there was a drought and there was just no water. But that's something to consider. But certainly it's a good option and a good alternative to get not just the camping experience, but also the cultural experience as well. One of the things that I found interesting was cemetery water. She was saying that if there was no water available in town or the spigots in the town were dry, that normally the church had water that was flowing because they needed to be able to keep the flowers healthy and alive in the cemetery. So she said that was a good trick to learn, and she said they made use of that on a regular basis. Signage-wise was pretty good, but again, there doesn't seem to be a Hexatrek set of signs. It seems to be you're going from one great route to the next.
Place to place, yeah.
Yeah, and having use of the online app, as far as I'm aware, Far Out doesn't have a Hexatrek guide as yet, but there is a dedicated one that's put out by the Hexatrek organisation that really gives you all the information just like Far Out does. So I think it's a good opportunity and a good way. And Claire was saying that maps weren't really necessary. The app worked really well. She had a small battery pack, which she topped a phone up to make sure she always had access to the phone to be able to use the mapping. And again, they were staying in hostels and hotels on a regular basis, so they never really ran out of power as such. Now, like any overseas trip, there's always the issue of visas. And again, whether you go to the US or whether you go to France to do the Hexatrek, you will need a visa. Now, Australians can stay in France for 3 months without having to do anything else but a tourist visa. But if you're trying to do a track that takes 3 to 5 months, unless you're super fit and super fast, 3 months is probably cutting it fine. So I think you really do need to get yourself a visa and probably, aim for the 5 months or even slightly longer if you can, depending on how slow you're going to be walking.
And the good news is Aussies and New Zealanders are not being discriminated against. That visa requirement for extended stays applies for everybody.
The other thing that I thought was interesting was she talked about hiking gas. Now, in Australia, if we are using the little disposable gas canisters, there are the stove unit themselves screw into the canisters. And she was saying that close to the big cities and the big towns, they had those. But for a lot of little towns, they had a click-on series of gas, which I'm not familiar with. But it may be something that's worthwhile looking at, and you may have to find that you might need a second stove unit, just depending on what sort of gas canisters you can get on the time.
Or maybe carry a couple, just in case.
And Claire said she was carrying quite a lot of gas, so it really depends on what it is you're looking at. So that's something to consider when you're doing this trip as well. Now, Claire was saying she was a late-to-life hiker, and she did talk about her first hike to a site called the Pinnacles in New Zealand. And as she said, you look at the name and think, that's going to be an up and down sort of track, and it was. But certainly she'd done enough hiking by the time she did this one that she was reasonably fit, and she was in her mid-50s, and that's always, as you get older, it becomes a bit harder. She indicated that she'd really got her gear dialed in, and so she had 13 kilos in her pack.
Yeah, that was really good.
Whereas her partner James had, I think it was about 17 kilos.
Yeah.
And he was carrying the tent, so he was doing the chivalrous thing.
I don't get to do that when we go camping.
No, I think you need to carry your own personal gear, and you share the rest of the gear together. But it's whichever way you want to go through and do it. I think having travelling light, particularly if you are going up and down over steep areas, is something that's definitely worthwhile doing. You want to minimise the packs themselves.
Well, for such a long trip and being able to restrict their packs to those weights, I thought that was pretty good.
And they were saying they were averaging around about 20 to 25 kilometres per day, which is not an unrealistic sort of distance to cover. You may travel less than that, you may travel more than that, but if you're planning on doing it in one go, you may have to look at what you need to average. And certainly there'll be some flatter areas of the trail and some more mountainous areas. But if you're planning on doing the whole track, then you're going to have to consider how fast and how many 0 days you're taking off to complete the track in time to coincide with your visa availability as well.
Yeah.
As part of this trip, Claire also wrote a book on her trip, and we've done a separate review on that. So if you go to the Australian Hiker website under the gear section and look at hiking the Hexa, we've got a gear review on that. And for me, this was a bit of a funny book. I sort of reading it, I'm thinking I couldn't quite work out how to describe it. And I went back on Amazon, which is where I bought my version from, and sure enough, it says it was a memoir, and that's probably the most logical thing to call this. It's not really a trail guide. It's not really a trip review. It's sort of something in between.
It's like an experience.
Yeah, and it provides enough information to help you plan. She talked about what gear they were carrying. It talked about accommodation and what they did there. It talked about their food, and it talked about their changes they made to their trip as they went. And I think from my perspective, between talking to Claire and doing this interview and reading the book and having a look online at other information, there is a big thought in my mind that I may not be able to do the Pacific Crest Trail. I might sort of try and just do the John Muir, which is the pick of the trail, if you like, and then do the Hexatrek in Europe, because that at least is doable in one single go if you do your planning right. You don't have to worry about bushfires closing the trail for large sections.
Well, assuming climate change doesn't impact you there too, Tim.
But yeah, it's the sort of thing that it's worthwhile, whether you get the Kindle version or the hard copy version, it's worthwhile getting hold of the book. If you're really into French, the Kindle version has an English version and a French version together. So you can finish reading the English version and then go on to reading the French version if you're really excited.
Or you could do it the other way around if you're multilingual.
Yeah, and Claire was saying that she'd been studying French for a couple of years before the trip, so that was certainly something that made this a good option as well. We asked Claire, the final questions of this is, would she recommend this trail to others? And she said definitely. She was really glad she opted to do this trail rather than the Pacific Crest Trail. And you have to make the choice which trails you want to go through and do. The potential is you could finish this track and then go onto the Camino if you really wanted to be enthusiastic. But yeah, I think that's probably a bit of break in between to be something worthwhile there.
And there's something in terms of, it's almost like an added extra to the European trails in a way, because you do get that cultural experience and the immersion in local communities and local towns. And I don't get the impression you get much of that on some of the US long trails.
Yeah, and mainly I think from our perspective is, we go to the US and it's another English-speaking country, and yes, they speak it slightly differently, but it's not as if you're working in a totally separate area.
Oh, sometimes it's a bit different.
Yeah, so as an example, don't try and buy lunch at 12 o'clock at a little takeaway. They've shut for lunch and you've missed your opportunity. And Claire said they did come across that a number of times, and we certainly had as well.
Yeah, that's right.
There. Okay, we hope you've enjoyed Claire telling her experience on this amazing French trail, and maybe this has inspired you to think outside the box and think away from the US. I certainly have, and this is certainly a trail that I've added to my list. It's a big list now, so whether I get to it, I don't know. But yeah, I think this is one of these tracks, even if you don't do the whole lot, which is what Claire did, they only did a section of it. A large section. Yeah. Over 1,000 kilometres is more than the Bibbulmun track. So I think, this is a good opportunity to have a hike in a European country that is just that little bit different. That's all for this week's episode. We hope you've enjoyed. Bye for now.
And bye from me.